Okay, so before I start this one, I just wanted to put in a little trigger warning. This one does depict PTSD, which I have done some research on, but I do not thoroughly know about it because I do not have this myself. It's not meant to make fun of it in any way or anything, but I just wanted to use it for this story thing. And there is a flashback that describes an abuse scene. So if anybody is sensitive to that, I recommend not listening to this. Okay. On to it. Over the course of knowing each other, the Lights had gotten accustomed to Virgil's needs and triggers as anxiety. However, Patton, more than the others, noticed just how jittery and jumpy he could be, most likely due to his sensitivity towards emotions. As it was kind of expected, he became suspicious over the time based on the shortest side's behavior in reaction to the darks. As well as at night, you see, he also had many problems with bad dreams. The first few weeks he dealt with it himself, but eventually Patton did find out about his constant lack of sleep. It became an often occurrence for one to spend the night in the other's room. Virgil wasn't exactly keen on the moral side knowing about it, but he knew he needed and appreciated the help. He'd been sleeping better the last few weeks than he had in a long time, but it still wasn't a cure. Patton would have to wake him up every so often because of uncontrollable shaking. He's even screamed a few times within his sleep. Growing worried and becoming aware that Virgil might simply not be okay, he scheduled a doctor appointment and hoped for the best. The next day, on the way to the hospital, Virgil was not happy. He was fine. Why did he have to go there instead of the Disney marathon he was supposed to be having with Roman right now? They gave the anxious side a normal physical, and besides a couple scars on his back, while on their way to healing, and being slightly malnourished, which was also greatly improving, he was perfectly fine. Patton could fix those problems. Those were the easy parts. The female doctor exited the small room where Virgil sat on a small cushioned couch. She motioned to the other side, who had been waiting nervously outside the room, to follow her. After they were a decent distance away, she addressed him in a low voice. He could tell that she wanted to discuss something based on her body language. "The boy you have," she started, "he is very strong-willed, even if not a go-getter." Patton nodded and waited for her to continue. "But I'm afraid he shows symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, or more commonly known as PTSD. More tests are required to gain a proper diagnosis, but from what I've seen, I have no doubt." The man was silent. "Just what led to this kind of thing?" "Please find out," he finally managed. The woman nodded and went back to her office. "You may leave now," she stated while walking in. "Please bring him back next week." The moral side thanked her, and the two left. The car ride home was silent. The next visit was confirmation of both men's fears. "I'm sorry," the doctor said to Patton, "but your friend has officially been diagnosed with PTSD. But with proper help, he can learn to manage it." Patton stared at nothing for a moment, horrified by what Virgil could have possibly gone through to reduce this condition. The woman shook her head and handed over a slip of paper. "I prescribed an anti-stress medication, Xanax, and he should attend cognitive processing therapy once a week. You should also get the others to show their support for him." "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked the man as he saw as his son once they were back in the car. Virgil didn't say anything, trying intently to avoid eye contact. Virgil opened his eyes. It was dark. He sat up and rubbed his eyes. What? This wasn't his room. By this point his eyes had adjusted. It was a small room with faded gray walls. The room was empty, beside the mattress on the floor that he'd been resting on, and a few ropes and chains on the floor. No, not here. There was a soft bang from some other room close by. He slid back against the wall, and as far away from the dark oak wood door as he could be. Angry mumbling could be heard along with heavy feet ascending the stairs. Virgil started to shake, but before he could take another breath, the door slammed open. "You!" The man he most feared pointed at him as he approached. "You have been a very bad kitty. I told you to clean the kitchen. Spotless. That's what I said, right?" The man was now towering over the anxious side. "Yes, sir," he squeaked out. "That's right," Rage growled loudly, grabbing the shorter by his hair and lifting him up, continuing to drag the small boy out of the small amount of safety of his room. They reached the kitchen. He threw Virgil headfirst into the counter. "Does this look spotless to you?" In fact, the kitchen was a total mess. "What? But I just cleaned it." His thoughts were broken along with probably something else when he was met with a fist to his face. "Answer me when I talk to you." The man pointed to the room, then back at the boy cowering on the floor. "Get it done." He pushed his pet to the ground. Virgil bit his tongue in an attempt not to scream as he felt something pop. His vision became a span of colored dots. "Get up," another voice commanded. Jealousy. When he stayed limp on the ground, desperately trying to locate his limbs so he could move, he received a kick to his stomach. His vision focused enough with the kick to see blood fly from his mouth onto the floor beside him. "Oh no, you made an even bigger mess." His other self-proclaimed owner said in a sing-song tone as he stepped on Anxiety's throat, smiling. "Lick it up like the animal you are." Virgil's hands shot to his throat, trying to get the shoe off of his oxygen source. "That's cute. Wake up. The world doesn't revolve around you, spoiled brat. You're lucky we feed you enough to keep you alive." Jealousy still hadn't lifted his foot, and the boy under him was starting to see dark circles cloud his vision. "You are worthless. You are nothing. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up, please. Virgil, please wake up." Virgil was aggressively shaken awake. He opened his eyes and remained silent for a few seconds before he shot up deep in a coughing fit, hand on his throat. Hey, shh, calm down, kiddo." Patton tried desperately to comfort him, but Virgil couldn't hear him. His hand clutched to his throat, and he was hyperventilating. Tears were falling down his face. "Kiddo, look at me." Patton pulled the younger's face to him. His eyes were wide and full of tears. "It's okay," he said as he hugged his son, who was now safe. Virgil hesitated before hugging back tightly, not caring about concealing his sobs. This continued for a few hours until they both were able to fall back asleep. This was getting worse again. The next day, Patton told the others to leave the anxious side alone. He stayed in his room for most of the morning until it was time to go. He had his first therapy session today, and he was dreading it. Neither of the others knew of it yet. But Roman was annoyed. Virgil and Patton had been acting very weird, and Virgil kept canceling their hangouts. He finally decided to follow them when they left again. A hospital? Why? He thought suspiciously. He walked in after them, keeping it on the down low. They didn't sit down in the waiting room. The two went straight down the hall. That's not the right way to go for a checkup. The creative side was very confused. Are they here to see someone or something? He quietly followed a short ways behind. He went to the door they entered and jogged down the hall, trying to catch up. They were all the way down to his left, and when Roman reached the end, the two men were nowhere in sight. He wandered a little bit until he heard a loud bang. A woman and a child he did not recognize and exited the room. That's not what caught Roman's attention, though. Through the slightly open door, before it closed once again, he could see both of them sitting and talking to someone. The woman and the young-looking boy with golden curls walked away from the door, and now the man could see the room door. Therapy room 3. Mentally impaired only. What? Mentally impaired? Why were they here? Is something wrong? Confused, he marched to the door. He listened against the door. He couldn't hear anything, though, so he inched the door open, only a crack. The things Roman heard made his face go pale. He couldn't believe that he hadn't noticed that Virgil was hurting this much. The stories he told, though, was the worst part. Roman could feel his blood starting to boil in anger. "So, now that you've been taking your medication for a couple weeks, how well do you think you're improving?" the person they spoke to asked. Honestly, Virgil felt like his former episodes were due to adjusting to new living conditions, but they wrote it off since they had apparently started getting worse. He only had like 2 nightmares this week. If anything, you'd think it was just strong paranoia. "Better, I guess," he responded and shrugged. "How's your medication been working overall, though?" the female doctor also questioned, smiling. He barely even noticed taking it, and the medicine didn't really seem to have any side effects so far, so he guessed it was a good sign. I don't have anything to really compare it to, Virgil responded, making Patton slightly sigh, but I guess it's been helping. Well, that's very good, she commented, looking at some papers. Patton nodded, and Virgil let his eyes and thoughts wander as they continued to talk. After a few minutes, they stood. It was nice to see you again, the doctor said, leading the two to the door. Your next session will be in 3 days. I look forward to it. Virgil was just happy to go home. He wondered if he could convince Roman to hang out despite him dropping their former plans. He turned around to face the door, but stopped when he caught Roman peeking through the door. Bro, what is he doing here? The two stared at each other for a moment. Whoops, Roman muttered. At that moment, another nurse noticed the taller side and proceeded to escort him out of that section. He wanted to talk to the two about this, so Roman waited outside for them. The two exited the room and saw Roman against the wall, next to the door. Virgil didn't want this. He wanted to just shrink away. Hey, Ro, what brings you here? He asked, failing to keep the nervousness off his face. So, what? The creative side was cut off when the other male took his hand and started dragging him away from the room. Beautiful day outside, isn't it? Let's go outside right now, okay? Okay. Virgil spoke quickly, with over-exaggerated enthusiasm. Wait, stop! What's going on? The shorter stopped and looked back over, cringing to himself a little. Virgil and Patton exchanged a look. Well, it's kind of a long story. Later that day, the creative and anxious side sat alone in Roman's dark room. Both were covered in his puffy cream blanket, while he played on the TV. That was the two men's only source of light, a blue tone illuminating them both. The credits started rolling, and Virgil began to get up to put on another movie. Before he could, though, the teller grabbed his arm. I know you're avoiding this subject. Virgil cursed the movie for having an end. What's there to say? He asked, relaxing back down and hugging himself. Gee, I don't know, you have a mental condition because of childhood trauma that you told none of us about? How long have you known about this? You need all the support you can get right now. Why wouldn't you let us help? Roman looked at the younger in his lap with concern, but the latter was determined to avoid eye contact. I don't know, I didn't want you guys to worry over me, was the response, finally meeting Roman's gaze. He smiled softly and shook his head. We worry 'cause we care, dum-dum. He booped Virgil's nose slightly, making him smile. Oh, how could you be so cruel? Virgil teased in a British accent as he hugged Roman's arm as they settled into a backwards hug. Roman held the smaller closer to his chest in a comforting embrace. They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments before Virgil turned to face the other. Roman smiled down at him, earning a lazy one in return. The anxious side closed his eyes and sighed contentedly. He liked resting like this. P? He opened one eye and looked curiously to the other at the mention of his name. Rowan brought one of the other's hands to his face and planted a soft kiss to the back of it. You know, I love you. I have for a while now. And I'd like it if you would let me help you all I can through this. Virgil blushed slightly, which was obvious on his pale face. Are you asking me out? He managed. The teller looked away and nodded. Princey, Virgil smiled in disbelief. Really? He asked in a quieter voice. Roman nodded once again. Of course, I could never lie to you. Virgil wrapped his arms around the other's neck and made him look back at him. Roman couldn't help it anymore and slowly connected their lips, which the younger man accepted immediately. It was soft and slow. Neither wanted to have to break it apart. Virgil finally pulled away and rested their foreheads together, giggling slightly when Roman whined in annoyance and tried to continue the kiss. He chuckled and pushed Roman's face away with his hand, though he finally shook his head and removed it, allowing him what he wanted. That night there were no nightmares in the mind of an anxious kitten who safely slept in his now boyfriend's arms.